So before we start talking about the passage that we know as the woman at the well, I'm going to see if we can do a bit of an overview of the Gospels. Some of this I've shared with you before, but it's always good to remember. So the Gospels, those pieces of literature that we know as Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, were not written by people that we knew, nor were they written by people who knew Jesus. All right? They were then, let's call this one Matthew because Matthew was this disciple, and we're going to call this one John because John was a disciple. It was a way of giving power and integrity to those pieces of literature. It wasn't until I was in my 20s that I realized that all of those Gospels actually told different stories. And I was like the Sunday school attendance queen, and that never was made very clear to me at the time. And so they're not biography. These are not biographies of Jesus, nor would it be right to even say these are histories of Jesus. These are pieces of literature that are meant to communicate theology, the vision, the perspective of the person who wrote it, a little bit of commentary of what was going on at the time. Mark, I think, written 70 years after the death of Jesus, Matthew and Luke 90, John not until about 110. So they were all written keeping particular audiences in mind. Mark is the foundation for Matthew and Luke. Mark gets right to the point. No birth stories, no angels, no Mary getting pregnant, nothing. Because all of those were pieces of literature that were added afterwards. Once again, theology, vision, not history, biography. Mark gets right to the point. Jesus has a lot of work to do because the earth, for some people, is very challenging, and he shows up, he hits the ground running. He is teaching and healing and teaching and healing. Matthew wants to place the story of Jesus within the larger context of the story of Israel. He wants to make sure that the people of Israel, or in his mind, recognize that, look, we know this guy. He was promised to us, remember the Messiah. So he's very intentional of wanting to hold together the tradition of Jesus and the tradition of Israel. Luke, different again. Luke sees this vision, this ministry, much bigger than a connection just to the people of Israel. He sees it as a vision for all people. And he in particular will focus on Jesus' ministry among the poor. And women. No, not that woman. Other women. That's John. When we get to John is speaking to a community that at the end of the first century, the Christians were invited to separate themselves from the synagogue. So up until then, for the first century, Jewish people who thought Jesus was the Messiah, all stayed within one community. But it didn't really fit with the cosmology of Israel for their Messiah to be dead and have no power. So they said, look, we don't really want to embrace that vision, so you guys got to go and just be your own religion, all right? So here is this little group of believers and people of the way who've lost an attachment to a fairly substantial institution, and John is writing to them, trying to provide them with encouragement, because now they're floating, all right? John goes big, all right? In the very beginning, before anything, in the beginning was the Word. So think of that as saying, in the beginning was the mystery. And in the beginning was this intention of all of us to be engaged in one with the mystery. So John's vision is really, really cosmic. But then he's got to bring it down to the ground, all right? And I think the thing that there are a lot of things that make John's gospel different, but I think just that his first miracle says it all. So I think we're going to just have to say something about his first miracle, because at that point then, everything else gets translated through the first miracle. So his first miracle is water into wine, all right? So we all know that we need water for life, but that's just life. That's just surviving. What really makes life great is wine and a party and dancing. So that's the lens that John puts up there and says, this way of living that this guy has invited us to, the kinds of communities he's invited us to create, they need to be measured by this story, water into wine. All right? So he came to the Samaritan city called Sychar near the plot of ground that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired out by his journey, was sitting by the well. It was noon. A Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." His disciples had gone to the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria?" Jews do not share things in common with Samaritans. In fact, they're arch enemies. Jesus said to her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you have no bucket and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us the well and with his sons and his flocks drank from it?" Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but those who drink of the water that I will give them will never be thirsty. The water that I will give will become in them a spring of water, gushing up to abundant life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I may never be thirsty or have to keep coming here to draw water." So, as I sat on the water's edge on Friday night and thought about this passage, I thought about the role that water has played in my own life, and certainly in everyone who shows up in the county. There's this seeking out of water because there's something about water in our lives that gives us more than sustenance, right? It is feeding us at a deep place. And I could recall as I grew up, and my dad would take us on these wacko cross-country trips that he called holidays. And but every once in a while we got to stop going around Superior, right? It's just the most endless drive, and we got to stop and spend time in the water. And in those moments, life stood still and heaven opened. I remember fast forward when my children were very young, and in that age when as a mother you're just always tired, and how do you get through all those long summer days? You go to the beach, and then those summer days are not so long. There is suddenly abundance there, and there is peace there, and there is joy there. And now, in another season of my life, I find myself constantly drawn to the water's edge. And there's something about being at the water whereby I kind of feel just enveloped in this whole mystery, and life is abundant. But let's go to first century Palestine. First century Palestinians, unless you're the aristocracy, did not have the luxury of just hanging out in the water and feeling one with the universe. Like, water was life. And so 2 days, 3 days without water max, and you were toast. And so the wells that were scattered among these communities were precious. And I think it's interesting how John always takes something of this earth and he wants to break it open for us, all right? So he's saying, yes, these wells are life for us. And everybody in the community knew that these wells were life. But like I said earlier, John was not interested in life that was just survival. John was interested in reminding us that this rabbi, this teacher, Jesus, had a higher invitation, and that was to see every opportunity as a means to feeding our ability to live abundantly. So John's also the person who puts in Jesus' mouth, "I came here that you would have abundant life." And what strikes me is that is not always a message that this tradition has shared. I'll just use a couple of examples. Driving through southeastern Ontario a few weeks back, we were driving through Old Order Mennonite country. It is so spectacularly beautiful. There is not one blade of grass out of place on those farms. Like, there is a commitment to order and beauty like none I've ever seen. And we came across these buildings that did not identify themselves as churches. But it was a Sunday morning, and there was a whole bunch of people gathering. Margaret, you'll be familiar with this because you come from around that area. What color was every vehicle in the parking lot? Black. Wow. A color of abundant life? And I thought to myself, it is so interesting how the person who we hold as central to our tradition has not always been used as a mirror or an invitation to get people to blow it out of the water, to live abundantly, to live with joy, to live with a deep sense of what Hildegard of Bingen called greening. So back to water. I think when it comes to really thinking deeply about this metaphor of water that is meant to invite us to live abundantly, we need to have a look at something like the community garden. When you look at the community garden, or your own gardens, or your floral gardens, or anyone else's gardens, when you look at what you do when you take a seed and add water, it is beyond belief. That garden is completely out of control with life out there. It's completely out of control with life because of water. And I think Jesus might say to us, okay, you see that garden there? It's completely out of control. It is burgeoning with fruit and joy and abundance and generosity. And that, my friends, is what it looks like when we're living in the Spirit. That's what we are called to look like. So Hildegard of Bingen would say, the whole earth knows what it's like to be greening in the Spirit, to be abundant and fruitful. And she said that same invitation is for us. We are called to live with abundant life. We are called to drink deeply of living water. We are called to be living water. So my question to you would be this. What is it that serves as living water in your life? We've already got the goal, right? You think the garden wild with life, you think the party where there's way more wine than anybody's seen in their life. What would you need to be able to claim such a spirit, to be filled to overflowing with such a spirit? Another to-do list? Another responsibility? Another bed to make? Then the next question is, as good Protestants who have been raised on the work ethic, do you even know? Do you know what it is that fills you with abundant life? What is it that comes to you as living water? Is it jazz? We had jazz here 3 days in a row. Is it the beach after 6 o'clock when the crowds have gone? Is it listening to Tom play something really groovy? Is it looking in the eyes of your granddaughter? Is it reading a book? Is it getting on your bike? The other thing I think it's important to say is that this gift of living water is so much bigger than this tradition. And I think there are times when, in fact, we have to get away from things that imprison us in this tradition, like all this stuff about sin and shame and must and should, to embrace, I think, a larger story, which is what John was trying to invite us to do. So, for example, I guess we need to ask ourselves, where is this living water obvious in the community around us? Like, where are people living with so much vitality and generosity and joy? And how can we be part and get a hold of some of that living water? So I think about the Food Not Bombs community feast that will be held in Benson Park today. Come, eat and drink and be filled. Everyone. Those of you who live with abundance, those of you who live in scarcity, come and be a part of this community feast. Wow, that sounds like a place where, kind of like the garden, crazy life happening there. Generosity, connectedness, joy, home. Or I think about what Emmanuel Baptist Church is planning to do with Pinecrest School. We're going to take this affordable housing thing by the tail, and we're going to create something in our community so that seniors can stay in their homes, they can be connected, and we can ensure that they get living water well into the twilight years of their life. Or what about the folk who want to buy or take over Sophiasburg School so that we don't have to close another community school? And say, look, keep the kids in their community. We're going to take a third of this building and make it a place where we, after other models, prepare food. And then we engage the kids in this work as well. And together as community, we reflect another spreadsheet, another set of values that doesn't just say, oh, well, we can't afford it. I guess we're going to have to give that up. So I want us to think about, while Tom is playing this most glorious piece of water. It's a piece of water he's playing. It's called Waterfall. And I want you to consider how, after the invitation of John's Jesus, you are being most faithful to this tradition when you are most alive. And what is it that makes you most alive? And how can you be part of initiatives and conversations and communities that provide opportunities for others to feel most alive, so that you can live in response to Jesus' invitation abundantly?